Welcome back to another episode of The Summer of Me. I am so excited today. We have a guest, Jason Lewis, as he's formerly known. Okay, you guys. So Jay and I used to date back in the day, just real briefly. First, we were friends. We started working together at Zebra Club, which was a little boutique in the mall. We were so ahead of our game. And then we just, found a propensity for music and liked things that we shared likes. And so we just started hanging out. And then we dated for a hot minute and that didn't work out either. And so we just stayed friends. So he is coming on to hang out with us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
It's dope, by the way. I love the podcast. I'm so glad you're doing it. It's brilliant.
Oh, thanks. It's been fun. Okay, so the reason I'm having Jason on is because I find him to be somebody who is incredibly wise and he's really good at talking. Always has been. He's just very just an interesting person to talk to. And I listen to podcasts and I always find that the people that are the most interesting aren't the people that have pages of accolades and authors and all these things. It's the people who have real life experience and have a heart to talk about it. And I've always admired that about you is you have experiences and you're willing to talk about them and be vulnerable about them and share and help people that are in your life. And Jason was actually, funny enough, one of the first people that I told about my divorce. Like I said, we stayed friends. We both had kids, both got married, and just kind of kept up. We would text occasionally. We would, see each other on social media and stuff. And we had this weird connection that was just I know your heart, you know my heart. It's we just have always had a really mutual respect for each other. I think I can't speak for you, but
I agree.
And so I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I came back to Seattle. I was in the throes of thinking about getting a divorce, and I was hey, can you meet up? Can you have coffee? So Jason had previously been married, and I don't know how long before that, maybe gone through a divorce. Had a kid, gone through a divorce. And I remember watching how you and Heather co-parented and watched how they have the cutest little guy. His name's Huck. And just how you guys raised him together and how you went through your divorce. Obviously, I'm sure there was so many moments of just hell, but you went through it really gracefully. And so I was can you talk? Can you sit down with me? And so we met at this coffee shop and I just bawled. I remember just crying and you gave me so many moments of just sound advice. So anyways, let's hear a little bit about you before we get into all the nitty gritty.
All right. Well, no, as you said, so I was married a long time ago, about at this point, 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And I live in Seattle area, greater Seattle area. And then, I have one little dude. He's 9. His name's Huck. He's the man.
He's so cute.
And yeah, he's the coolest. He is the best dude. And in regards to divorce, I think that's something that, one, my parents got divorced when I was younger, and it was really bad. And so I remember that experience, and I know that once I came to that point in my marriage and I knew that I was facing that decision, I just kind of made an internal vow that I just simply would not do what kind of I had undergone to my son. And so I just made a really concerted effort to make sure that I was as vulnerable as I could be, as open as I could be. And it's incredibly challenging because your heart's broken in so many different ways, for so many various reasons. And it's so tough to not let the feelings that you're having kind of interrupt your ability to do, in my position, which was I had a kid, to do what's best for the kid. And that I think was the biggest goal. But yeah, and now we're down the road. Everything's pretty darn good. And I mean, it's stable. I think that's positive, and there's no bad below. That's
it right there.
Say it. What?
Neutrality is the goal, right? It's I don't need to love this person. I don't need to hate this person. I just as long as life is stable and there's a level of peace for your kids, I think that is ultimately the co-parenting goal. And, I hear from a lot of people but I'm married to this guy who's this bad person. And dude, everybody has a bone to pick with somebody. And I have found that obviously there's extenuating circumstances of somebody that's abusive or there's some things, but so many of co-parenting relationships have an absolute hole in between them because of ego. And, people don't want to put themselves aside for the sake of their kids because it's like, well, I feel justified in this. Well, I'm right here. Or, well, this person's a prick. Like,
Hmm.
nobody cares. Your kids could give two fucks if their dad's a prick. They really couldn't. They don't care. They just want to know if he's going to keep them safe, if he's going to love them, and if he's going to show up for them. Like, that's it. Um,
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing is too is that I think one of the little nuances there that I also see sometimes happen is like how people will say around your kids, like your kids are not these vessels for you to like process your childhood trauma, right? You don't use them to kind of navigate your own wounding, your own issues. Sometimes what happens is people will, and only saying this because I did this early on and realized very quickly that like, oof, what a toxic and dark
mm-hmm.
thing I thought I did, which is sometimes there's a quality in the person that for you is like venom to your fucking soul. So you're
Yeah.
like, I can't. And so then what happens is like if you see that rear its head in your kid,
Oof.
you almost feel this propensity to want to like quell that, to just destroy that thing.
Yeah.
And the hard part is that I would say just like an addendum to that is like your kids are also not a place for you to exact, process, or defeat something in the other. And
It's
that's where
so
sometimes
true.
it's tough because they are such an amalgam of you, the other parent, and they're also their own distinctly unique person. But that's where I think sometimes things get messy is kids become pawns not just in like who's got them on Christmas and who's going to are they going on this vacation and you bought them those shoes I told them no. It also becomes like hey, this kid is this way, and that's like you, and I can't fucking stand that, and so now I'm gonna get rid of that, and like, and
No,
that's
you
like
don't
where
like sports. We do not like sports in this
yeah.
family.
So it requires so much humility, and I think that's where I would say at the end of the day, how you see your kids and how you see your role to your kids, and whatever tricks you need to play with yourself. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
whatever trick you need to play in your own mind to show up the best you can for your kids. I think that's if you have them, it's extremely vital.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about this a little bit, but I would love for you to elaborate because I think this is a great, like, a hot take, so to speak, on
Mm.
divorce. But I think, it's easy to look at like, okay, and we're getting a divorce, and then like your whole world just explodes and everything feels overwhelming, and you're like, what's
Mhm.
going to change here? What's going to change here? But you had kind of narrowed it down in a conversation that we had where it was like three kind of buckets that really dramatically change in a divorce. And I think that
Yeah.
it's like it's not only is it really true, but it makes it a little bit more digestible for somebody who is in the beginning of that process and feeling just absolutely under a tsunami of feelings and emotions and can't really grasp like what's going to actually tangibly change about their life. So, will you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so basically what I would say is that on average for most people, the three biggest areas that you're going to get this huge disruption in is that one, basically I always say it's like intimacy, kids, and finances.
Mhm.
So generally on average, people are collaborating on their finances, their financial future, and life building is happening as a unit. No, and so that goes away. Now, what your financial future looks like and what you can provide for your kids and what you can access is solely often reliant upon one person, and that becomes extremely an extreme place of tension for some people. Number two is that obviously now co-parenting, parenting in general is strained already just because it's two people. But once you're divorced, boy, it gets significantly harder
Yeah.
because now you're managing schedules and who's taking them on sports and ball weekends and all that stuff. And now there's so much coordination that now parenting is so much more challenging. You used to do it in real time, and now you no longer do, and that's
And
really
like
tough.
you don't also account for like who else is going to be parenting these kids. Like there's going to
A
be other
hundred.
people and then you're like, I didn't sign that motherfucker up to be my kid's mom.
Yeah,
Like hell no. Like their
right.
mom's
And
got
that's the
Riz. She has no like.
And that's the thing is that's the third part, which is that, and then also at the intimacy level, that like there are other people now that you're no longer that person's person, and now there's other people being brought not only into your life,
Yeah.
but your children's lives, and then it's you're just kind of like, who is this fucked up stranger that is like
Even
interjecting
if they're
themselves?
not, even if they're
No,
not,
and
like you're
no,
like,
no. I'm just talking about that
yeah.
initial, like you said, that first initial big disorientation is I no longer have this person. They potentially may have someone. My money's split, and now what we can do is so much different. And then also, who's parenting my kids? How we're parenting kids? Because now you're
Mhm.
by yourself, and if you want to parent a particular way, you know, and this is where it's a little more nuanced because I would say, when it comes to that stuff, yeah, you want to parent as if in some regard you're the only parent so that you can be authentic and real and
Yeah.
true. But yeah, so those are kind of the big three, I think, on average.
What would you say, like going through? I mean, I know it was obviously like close to a decade ago, but what would you say at this point was like when you look back at that experience was some of the best either like advice or like something that kind of helped you through that? Because I know for me, like there's like these checkpoints in that where I was like, okay, I healed from that moment, or like I got this
Yeah.
piece of advice, or I learned this lesson, and like that changed the trajectory for me.
hmm I think it's a combination of things that I've heard is really good. One thing I always remind myself, it's like a famous C.S. Lewis quote. It says, "There are far better things ahead than any we leave behind."
Mm.
I kind of try to live by that, which is that there is and basically that's like kind of what someone said, which is like don't ruminate. That it's just poison for life is to really throw yourself into the past and do that constant kind of rigmarole of evaluating it. Should I have done this? Would this have gone this way? Did I say this thing? Why did they do this? Yada yada. And you're just ruminating on the most poisonous and
Yeah, my
painful
mom used to always
parts.
say like every time you like replay a conversation, every time you like go look at a social media account, every time you text she's like you're literally drinking poison. Just imagine you taking a
Mm.
bottle and drinking poison. Like that's she's like you're going to still move forward, but like you're drinking poison. You're going to be sick, dog.
Yeah, yeah. You slow yourself down
Yeah.
so much from the beauty that waits for you in life by being hung up on a thing that was so clearly not beautiful.
Mhm.
And the part is that it's so obvious when you say it now, but in that moment, your brain is so wired for consistency and comfort, even if it's poison, even if it is bad, right? Your brain's like, well, this is what I've been doing. And so all of a sudden now that disorientation, that newness creates a fear. So that was one thing was just to keep myself pointed either to the present or future. And every time I would get into that rumination, just to be like, dude, there's far better things ahead. You really have to believe that for yourself, both in love and in life.
Mhm.
Um, and that was a good just kind of mantra I think I used. And then I think the other big thing was initially, and we still have moments, but nothing like we did initially. Co-parenting was super hard, and one of the things my therapist said, and it's really helpful. Although it's a little bit weird, she was just like, "They're dead," and I was like, "Watch, because you pretend they're dead.
Yeah.
You just live your life, like, and you parent, and you show up in your life, and you participate in something like they're gone."
You can't control what they're
Um,
doing in their life.
Yes, and that as soon as you can free yourself from their presence in that way of just being like the way they enter your mind around thinking about how you might do things or what you would do or how it would go. It's like you all of a sudden start to feel like your old self before you met them. And I think
Yeah.
that's often what we're looking for when we try to describe a good marriage. What we're primarily, I think, talking about is relationships where people get to feel as if they authentically belong to the other person, meaning I get to be exactly who I am, and yet I can also belong to you. And I
Yeah.
think when we talk about a poisonous relationship, be it a friendship or a relationship, a marriage, it is often that relationship whereby I have to sacrifice or abandon myself in order to belong to you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so I think that understanding that and going in and being like, dude, the more that you can distance yourself from their influence on you, the more that you get to return to who you are. And the second you are, holy shit, you get a hell of a lot happier. And you start to really remember what made you feel alive and feel connected.
And you start to
And then,
realize like how much of yourself that you sacrificed or didn't love or didn't choose to in order to be in that relationship, and then and then all of a sudden like this light shines on it and you're like what was I doing? And if you're not proactive though about like healing that, you're going to jump right back into the same thing when somebody else has their pretty little shiny object syndrome, you know?
I totally, and I think you also have to give yourself some grace for the fact that you're probably going to fuck it up the first few times you jump back, you jump back into to
No, you
romance.
don't
Yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's kind of like giving a 16-year-old a car. Like you're going to crash that first one, but I think at the same time, like you gotta go spin the tires and go around the block a few times. Otherwise, you're never going to figure it out. And I think often what happens is, and this is like to everybody. I mean, I would genuinely say to every relationship I've had post my marriage there is such a deep level of gratitude, even if potentially I left brokenhearted or they fell apart. I'm so deeply grateful for the people because at the time, I also think you are just fractured in so many ways and you're
Mm,
healing in so many deep levels. And I'm so grateful that the people showed up in my life uh, to try with me,
yeah.
even if it was overwhelming. And I think those are extremely courageous women and people. And I also feel like some responsibility for the fact that like shit, dude, you sometimes you can't even see the ways in which you're injured and you can't know to get back out there, but there's so much of it that I'd say was healing. So,
I saw a quote the other
yeah.
day and it said, "You can't heal your relationship issues alone." And I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, that's the
true."
shittiest part.
Yeah,
That's the
like
dumbest
we're
part.
alone, we're free, and
Yes,
fucked up
bro.
still. Like
Yeah,
I,
because I'm like, I just want it to be like a band-aid. Like, bro, throw Neosporin on this fucking broken heart and a band-aid and give me 2 weeks. The shit's good, no scar, back to my life. And it's like,
back in
no, dude, if
business.
you, yeah, it's like, no, if you want to like be okay, you have to actually go through it. And that's also such a great indicator on finding a quality partner is someone who can create that space for you. Because no one's
Yeah.
showing up. No one's showing up fucking free and clear, dude. Not if you're a human being. You know what I mean? Like,
And
I don't
if
think
you
so.
are, like, that's probably not it.
Yeah, and I also think too the hard part is that tragically the like prevalence of hypergamy and the dating app world, I mean, it really serves nobody. And the truth really is too that once a person's been married, they have, I would argue, like an awareness of love at a certain depth
Yeah,
that a non-married person, I don't care whether you have kids or not, but there's a certain kind of relational love at its depth that if you've never had that kind of deep commitment like that, you can't know. And
it's
I
true.
always think it's like advice that I tell my friends all the time. It's something I always say to myself too, which is like, what do human beings get good at? Whatever they practice. So if you practice forming short-term connections with very little substance, you get really good at engaging in relationships at that level. And then the tragic part is when you meet someone who is, say, potentially a more serial monogamous long-term partnership or marriage type person, they've been practicing how to make deep connections for long periods of time that sustain themselves through profound conflicts and
Yeah,
grief and heartbreak and miscommunications and seasons of a lack of attraction to one another. And then it's so much more nuanced and colorful and capable. But
yeah.
the pro like but it may not be as lighthearted and it might not be as like storybook,
It's not as
because you're
sexy
like,
for sure.
it's not right. But I think at the same time, that's the part where people that have been there know the benefit of it. And I think that's where one of the tricky parts of trying to connect as a married person prior is that you're still walking in with the marriage brain a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you did that? Do you feel like you
Oh,
did
I'm
that a
like,
little bit?
listen, can we skip the like little intricacies? Can I just like fucking make you a grilled cheese and like sit on the couch together and like
Right, you're trying to reestablish that
yeah,
deep
like
intimacy.
I'm a
Yeah.
wife, bitch. Don't make me put my pants on and like get out in the house and like do a date. Like I
Yeah.
mean, I know gender roles, but like listen, like I'm meant for the kitchen, okay? I'm not like
Right. And
um
I think that's the thing. Did you feel like when you went through that process that like what do you feel like the gifts and curses of that are? Because I
well,
think
I
some people.
yeah, I mean,
Go for it. Go for it.
I think it's true. Like it's like you're sort of disabled in a way. I'm like I don't know how to date, and I've like you said, like the first relationship after divorce is usually like a crash and burn in some capacity, which I've just obviously experienced. But I think that like you know how to do a relationship in one way and have done that. I was married for 12 years. Like you know how to do that relationship in that way, and then to try to like reprogram your brain and be like, well, I'm supposed to ask this person like what their fucking favorite color is. Like, no, like it's like it's so hard to figure out. But again, like you also
Yeah.
like I've had the habit of like jumping into that like wife mode with people, and then I'm like, wait, I don't even know you. Like I'm not trying to like serve you, dinner and like all these
Yes.
things. And so
Yes.
it's just like this weird
Yeah.
balance where you're really trying to figure out like where do I fit in this? And honestly, like you come to a point where you're like I can rock this on my own, and like I don't, if somebody's not going to come in and like be vulnerable and be ready to grow and be ready to like work through the hard things. Yeah, of course you're going to have a honeymoon period, but like that shit ends fast. Like the more relationships you're in my opinion, the honeymoon period ends faster and faster every single time, because it's like you know how that like shit gets real with people, and it's like let's face this now instead of like
Yeah.
delaying the inevitable.
I actually think and so this thing, I agree with everything you said. The one thing I think I have found is that what I feel like you're right about for sure is it does go away, that like honeymoon. It goes away quicker in a way.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is if you really meet somebody who can fuck with you, who really vibe with you, it's like it's not that it goes away quick, it's that it kind of goes like this, goes away, and then it comes back. Because
Yeah.
what happens is you're like, oh, they're so
TBD on
exciting, and
that.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, because I think the thing is that you go through that phase of like, cool, like new person, new stories, new body, new
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, new connection, new ways of engaging with a person. And then you're kind of like, but also like I got kids in a real life and fucking true feelings and some
Yes.
trauma and some blah blah. And like, are you really a real motherfucker? And then if they show up
If,
in that
yeah.
authentic way, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit,
Now
right?
we've
And then
like
your
unlocked
brain,
a new level.
right. And I think what's happened is that as you've gone through more relationships, all that's happening is the kind of Snow White Prince
Mm-hmm.
Charming brain has been murdered. So like it gets a very short life the older you get.
Yeah.
But then I think what does happen, and I think this is very true, is that what is always the case is when you find a substantial connection, you will fall back into cocaine brain. But the problem is what it is you need to see more to get there. When
Yeah.
you're 23, you're like, oh,
Mm-mm.
like six pack, he's tall, you know what I mean? He's funny,
There's
like
a
we're meant to be together. And when you get older, you're like, okay, how capable are you of communicating your emotions around the things that are challenging for you, and have you healed your inner child?
tell
And do
me your
you know like, oh,
traumas. Yeah.
right?
What's your
Because you
attachment style? Tell me about your inner child wounds. Like I
totally,
need to know the things.
absolutely, and I think that's so healthy. I can't imagine. That's why I always think it's so. I mean, no, I mean I'm not shitting on anybody, but that's why I think it is so odd when someone is like 47 with a 25-year-old, because I'm like, the depth that is in you,
Yeah.
even if you're unaware of it, you are a significantly more nuanced person at 47, and what you need to really feel seen. And I'm not saying that's what everybody's choosing, so that's why I'm not judging it. And everyone's wanting that. But if
Yeah.
you want to be seen, if you want to feel like who I am is good the way I am, and that there's truly a person out there who can like see all your little shit and go like, God, you're
Mm.
such a deeply valuable, lovely human being, and to recognize in honesty that like we're all impossible to deal with,
Yeah.
we're all impossible to live with, and the right people are always fucking worth it.
Yeah.
And we know this from our deep friendships, and we know this from our family, we
Yep.
know this from other people. Like they are hard to deal with, and we just, god dang it, we could never live without them. When you
No.
really have that, it's like that's what you can gather and gain. And to me, that's such a it's a profound thing to experience. And novelty, I think, loses its luster. That's me personally. I think it
I
loses its
agree.
luster.
Yeah.
But if you've never practiced it, holy shit, you're going to be scared of it. I mean, it's overwhelming. Maybe not when you're 23 and nobody knows dick all about the world or yourself. But by the time you turn like, almost 40 or 35, you're like, oh my God, I'm getting old. It's like, yeah, you're almost irrelevant. You're almost never going to be cool again, bro. So you better find someone who actually likes you. I don't know, teach
Yeah.
their own.
There's
Teach their
a
own.
there's a TikTok trend going around and it's like casual things we did like when we first dated or something like that. And
Hmm.
then like it pans like and it like shows a picture of the couple and then it pans to like the couple and it's like nothing was casual. We met and like didn't like the first date and like never spent another day away from apart and 3 months later like we're engaged. And I'm like as a divorced woman I'm looking at this like
Right,
I don't know.
right.
TBD. Like
Yes.
don't hold
And
your breath.
I think now where I'm at, and you'd have to tell me because I'm curious to know how you view it. I just view this now like one, I don't date very often, and I've had actually
Yeah.
primarily long-term partnerships is what I've done since I've been divorced. Um, and the thing is, I'm curious to know for you, do you feel like I feel like I show up now, and God, when I was younger, for some reason, I was like very much looking for an attachment.
Mhm.
And I think now the way I approach it is I'm looking for a depth of connection.
Yeah.
And if that connection is legitimate, the long term, all those things will naturally flow out of that. Do you feel similar, or do you think it's different for you?
Yeah, well, it's funny because like losing this relationship, I realized that like one of the bigger things that I'm grieving over like the actual loss of the person is the loss of the attachment. And then I've been starting to ask myself like, well, why do you need that attachment so bad? Like and I've like since divorce and all of those things, I have like this very anxious attachment style. Like I need somebody to choose and so I think
Mm,
it's like growing through that process to where you're like the goal is to get to that place where it's like I don't need the attachment with somebody. I believe that God created us to be like with people and we are like in companionship and all those things. I don't necessarily think that
mhm,
you have to have a romantic partner to find that. However, I
mhm,
think that there is a lot of depth to be unlocked there, but to your point, I don't think that like leading with attachment is the answer because we tend to forego a lot of important things when we're just leading with attachment versus leading with like who is the person that's going to allow me to show up 1,000,000% as I am and still love me through that. Because I think that that's always the temptation in a relationship is like, well, I'm going to be, for me at least, it always has been like, I'm going to be so mostly myself, but like I have things that like aren't that important to me, and like I can kind of put aside to make this person fit
Mm,
into my box of, whatever like fills the void of like this attachment wound that I have. And so um I think I do see you as like I don't need the attachment as much as like I need somebody. I mean, I need like that ride or die, like who's gonna see me for who I am. And like we all have shit, we all have like annoying tendencies and like trauma and shit that I'm like, man, rears its ugly head in the, for me. And I'm like, "Ah, I hate that this is part of me," but it is like this is who I am. And like
yeah,
you get to a certain place where you're not going to sacrifice that. You'd rather just be alone and like have connection in other places in your life than to have a romantic partner where you have to hide parts of you or not show up genuinely because you know that that's like not going to honor that, like they're not going to honor that in you.
totally. And I think one of the things I mean, I think about all the time is like something my best friend said. He has one of the best marriages I know. And he was like, the truth is I dated 30 people before something. I don't think that's the right number, but he was like,
Yeah.
anyways, he's like, I dated quite a few people before I met my partner. All of them tried to change me and one didn't. And that's the one I married.
So
And I
good.
think, and I think it's like the reality that like when you really do meet somebody, like I have zero interest in changing my friends, their flaws and their unbelievable abilities and talents. Like
Yeah.
I love them. I like the mess of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the same way, it's because there is so much good there. I think that when you deal with the part that is imperfect, it's almost like it almost endears you to them.
Yeah,
And
and
I
you
think in
also
this,
like know that their heart is in the right place. Their intentions are pure. It's like
and
you
you're squared away with them.
yeah.
Like, hey, when Jay's fucking on one, like they're like, okay, but we fuck with this dude. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not like, oh God, dude, can you get out of here? And that sense that you need to be something different in order to achieve affection, support, love,
Mhm.
affirmation, whatever. And I think so often it's not the fault of our parents in full, but I think a lot of us too just grew up generationally with those influences around us where so much of our behavior and so much of who we were was built around making other people feel comfortable,
Yeah.
making sure our parents were pleased with us, making sure that we were appropriate, making sure that we were, particular. And like if you grew up in church, right, then you had Jesus, then you had the fucking whole other thing of a looming God who was frustrated
Purity.
if, yes, right. So you have so many pressures, and now I think this kind of deconstruction around those least helpful ideas
Yeah.
and that willingness, like you said, to just show up as you are 1,000,000%. I do think there is always going to be compromise in any relationship that's as intimate as a marriage is. But I think the part that you're describing, that self-sacrificial part where you're burying part of who you are because you
Mhm.
know it won't be accepted, there can be no place for that in any
No,
real relationship.
yeah, I found myself in so many like relationships in my past like making myself smaller. Like
Hmm.
making my dreams smaller, making my job smaller, making like because it's like, oh, I don't want to make that person uncomfortable, or like what if I'm too, the classic like I don't want to be too much. Well, bitch, I
Classic.
am too much. Like I am. Like
Well, you're just not too, but you're not too much for the people who really appreciate, who really can see you. You're
yeah.
not too much. And I would actually argue that it is a true friend and a true ally and someone who truly loves you that wants to see whatever it is you are blossom and see
Exactly.
more of that. And the idea that you are walking into something where someone is looking you in the face going, I love you, and simultaneously what you're feeling is be less of what you are. Those are
Yeah.
contradictory energies. That should be a red flag right there that, hey, there's not space for you, or you lack the confidence to show up authentically.
Yeah. Can
And
we
my
talk
thing would
about
be
red
like,
flags for a second?
go for it. Go for it. What red flags? What do
Well,
you want to know?
I just think that like you brought that up, and I think that this is since we're talking about just like dating and finding partners and stuff like that. I would just like to like if I had like a presidential campaign, it would to myself, it would be like let's stop ignoring red flags. Like let's just make that a policy. Like because I do find that like we talk about these like bigger issues, right? Where you feel like you have to make yourself small and like or you feel like that the person's not willing to like sit in the like the tunnels with you and just like go through the shit.
Mhm.
Most of the time there are red flags for those things very early
100,
on that
a
we tend
hundred.
to ignore because it's like, well, if I just like hide this part of me, that person will like love me, even though they're saying things like, oh,
Mm.
I want a girl who's just chill. Like what? I'm like, bitch, I can't tell you how
Gross.
many times I've heard like,
That shit is so
I just want a
gross.
girl who's laid back and lets me golf on Saturdays. I'm like,
Ew,
okay,
yuck. My thing is, I think that kind of shit grosses me out. Just because I'm, as you know, I'm such a talker and a super relational person. So
yeah,
I like want the big energy because I'm like I guess like I literally was telling this to my sister. I go, of all the things I could have ever hoped for my life, all the things I've dreamed it would be, the one thing I have never wanted it to fucking be a day in my life is chill. If I die on this earth and all I could say in my life is it was mad chill, dog,
Is chill.
I'm gonna be so disappointed in my earthly existence. And I think people that have that, I think that for me is always a red flag because what it shows is, and I think relationships can totally function with that at the base, but it requires two people that are the same. But the reality is, what it shows is that there are so many things more vital to me than getting to know the mystery that is you.
Yeah.
And if I have to spend all this energy getting to know all your little thoughts and all your little fucking feelings and blah, 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 I'm going to be so exhausted, I'm going to hate my life. Where I'm the opposite, where I'm going to be like, we'll go somewhere to just get a coffee and be like, I don't like the attitude on that lady that gave you that fucking Americano. Right? Like, I want to talk about every
Let's
little,
process.
yeah, I want to talk about every little thing because I think that to me, the most mysterious part of life, the most fascinating part is people. And I
Yeah.
think so that's where that you talk about the red flag thing and we have them, we see them and we deny them and we kill parts of them. I'm like, that's exactly right. You know what you would love, you know what you would like, and you lack the conviction to go until I see it.
Yeah. Well, because we have
Until I see
scarcity,
it.
right? Like we have this scarcity mindset of like,
Oh, for sure.
I don't know, like there's not going to be. I mean, I say it all the time. I'm like, I'm just going to be alone forever, which like it is very possible. Like at this point, I'm like,
It
it's very.
seems overly dramatic. It seems overly dramatic. I think
but
I
but I'm also like,
was literally in a committed relationship maybe a week ago and is like, I guess I'll be alone forever. I mean, that's like out of a movie.
I'm dying alone. But but
Oh my God, I love it.
listen. What I was saying though is
Buddy,
scarcity mindset because I
there you go.
genuinely am like the more you go through dating and the more you go through relationships, whether it's marriage, divorce, whatever, like you're you learn more about yourself and then I don't necessarily know that it's like your standards as much as like what you need and like what you like you said like the level of depth in which can exist in a relationship and like you're not going to take something unless you're making a cognitive decision like I'm just going to go bang on a Friday night like fine do you but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
otherwise like you're not going to accept somebody that's going to just show up and be like I just want a girl who's chill like you're going to be like no
hmm
like let's get into like the real nitty-gritty like tell me your wounds.
Well, I think the other thing too, I agree with you. I think that's totally true, and I think the hard part is for women is that often, goes for men too, is a lack of awareness on what actually really would be valuable to your life and feels very valuable. So a great example is one of my best friends in the entire world, been my friend since seventh grade, Annie. She has always dated dudes that, no offense to her, she knows I love her and think the world of her,
She's
but
the
they
sweetest. I
have,
remember her.
yeah, she's the best, but she has often dated people that were how would I say this? They kind of took from her, is what I would
Mm.
say on average. On average, they took from her, and and they were kind of very, no offense, like I'm sure they're good dudes, but it was kind of like my way that kind of like make me happy thing. They kind of like I just want to chill. I don't really have
Yeah.
a plan. I'm an artist. I'm expressing myself. Blah blah. I kind of was like I get because she's very artistic, but I was like but she's also an executor and a very high
Mm-hmm.
capacity person. And I was like, why don't you just date one finance bro? Just see
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's a
Just
different vibe.
dabble.
Just to say. Now the truth is she didn't, but she ended up that she's like her now fiance is like the fucking coolest dude. I absolutely love him. But if you were to line him up against any other guy in her
Yeah.
history, he is dynamically different.
Yeah.
He is one from Tennessee.
Mm.
He's two. He's like very focused, pharmacist, entrepreneur, business dude, crushes it, grinds, like just super
Yeah.
execute, does what he says he's gonna do. And I think that's provided her with such a level of safety and engagement. And he's curious about her and what she's doing and blah blah and how can he help. And he's like just a true collaborator. And I think so often what people do is they romanticize a particular lifestyle or relationship or a kind of person instead of going like Kendra, you are one of the most high capacity just individuals I
Mm-hmm.
know. You're a huge executor, and if I was to look at your life and go like, what would be like such a delight for you is somebody who comes in and is like, I'm gonna help you. That kind of person who's like, I actually get a shit ton of joy from helping you execute,
I'm
and like
like,
that's great. Yeah, exactly. You'd
that
be
doesn't
like,
exist.
yeah, see, and I would say that it does, but the problem is that in the same way that like we often look for certain things, our brains are wired because often too sometimes we're trying to achieve an old experience or like a dream, And it's
Well,
like,
I know
but
exactly. I'll tell you exactly what it is, and because
okay,
I've done this work, and I know
hit
exactly
me,
what it is,
hit me.
which is that like my inner child was like, I'm gonna work for love. I'm going to earn it. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna work harder. I'm gonna like
Mm,
prove myself, and like and no, I had a great childhood. No doing of my parents intentionally, but like I was raised in a family that was like my mom worked. We took care of my uncle who lived with us who was very sick, and so it was like in order for me to feel like I was like mattered and was valuable, it was like everybody else was like off doing their thing, and like I was gonna be like the steady. I was gonna be like the one who was like working the hardest, cleaning the kitchen, making the dinner, like in like or middle school or whatever. And so now I've always in past relationships equated like the harder I work, the more this person's going to love me and choose me. And so I find people that like need a lot from me because then I can give them a lot, and then I feel like that like then I deserve their love. Well, they just keep
hmm
taking and taking and taking and taking.
Yeah, because you said, because I think
And
you're
so,
such a guy. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough.
but it's good. I mean, it's good in the fact that like you said, like you take something from these relationships and you learn. And I see that this is a pattern. And like if we're not willing to do something about our patterns, like our life's not going to change. And so, for me now, I'm like until I feel like I'm at a healthy enough place to where I can be with somebody who just is a giver and like is willing to say like, hey, what can I? I mean, there was one guy that I dated, and I'll never forget it. And he literally would be like, we would like have coffee in the morning or whatever, and he'd be like, what can I do for you today? And I was like, I mean, talk dirty to me, honestly. Like, you don't need to do anything else. Like, just that question alone was like, what
You're
the
like, mama's
hell?
nipples
Like,
are hard.
like
Yeah,
who asks that? Like, but I was like, whoa, this is like a real
there's
thing.
a
Like, this
lot
is,
of people. Yeah, there's a lot of people who would, but I think that's the hard part is that I I would be. I think the thing that you're describing is true for so many people, and I've had that too. I also think, if I'm being super honest, it is the cultural pressure on women to
yeah,
feel that way. I
yeah,
think there's also an additional pressure on women to be like, it is your job to serve. And I tend to tell like my nieces and my sisters know this. I have always just like wanted them to like set the world on fire, and I have always been like, whatever you do, dude, like you just be your fucking self.
yeah.
And to thine own self be true is like my life motto. And I think the reality that you have this so much ability. It's not so much that I think you're looking for this person who's just like this servant, because I don't think you'd actually be attracted to
No,
that person. I think what you're looking for is genuinely a collaborator, a
yeah,
person that has like dynamic ideas, wants to manifest, can be someone you can soundboard off of, wants to help you, has their own shit too, that
yeah.
that actually interests you. And I think that's my point, which is if you're hanging out with people that are, it's hard to explain, but I feel like you've been successful in so many ways, but I think there's a other part of you that's like needs that person who actually knows what the fuck they're doing and isn't really that transient. Isn't like, oh, I'm gonna fucking bounce or whatever, or I'm
Yeah,
gonna, I feel
yeah.
like this today and I don't feel like this tomorrow. I think the stability of someone who's just kind of like, yeah, uh, this is what I'm gonna do and yada yada, and like this is where I want to help
And
you, and this is what I
actually
was
do
hoping we
it.
could do. Yes, and I think that's the thing is like you mentioned earlier, the red flags. The reason why I think so many people have a hard time acknowledging them, and I know for myself that's like part of it, is that I am such a fucking believer in people. I
I
just
am the same.
believe people
I
are
know.
so fucking good and so valuable and so capable of
I'm
so
like,
many
but you're
things.
capable. You can do this.
Yeah, and I also think, and I think in the same way, I, it's like tragic, and I think it's kind of what you're just going is you undervalue your own perceptiveness and your own needs. And so then you get in and you kind of so transition your view and your labor to be
Yeah.
like, it's all about helping this person become who they are. And
Oh,
I've learned one thing, and this is literally how I would describe it. It's like, I would say, I sometimes, frequently, I meet somebody, and when I meet them, they aren't as strong as they truly are. Then they're with me. Then they get strong. Then they're like,
safe with
hey,
daddy.
yeah, then they're like, "Hey, fuck you, dog. I'm out." It's like I think that experience. It's not really that. It's mostly that I all of a sudden get to a point where I'm like, "Hey, the good thing is you've become more of who you are." But what happens to be the case is that the thing they needed is what I had to offer at the time, and that made me wake up to the fact that like what I offered you is actually unsustainable. That like I offered you
Yeah.
something which is this like deep level of care and concern at an almost like you mentioned a parental level
Yeah.
because you needed it because you got your ass kicked somewhere in life.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to have someone show up like that. The problem is then I get fatigued down the road 10 months and I'm like, hey, this
Well,
guy did
none
this
of
whole
your needs are being met. So then you're like,
totally. And you're
well,
like, where's you need that reciprocity.
yeah.
And at the same time, I can't fault them because part of that's the story that I handed them. It's like, hey, this is how it will go. And so I think there's the red flags thing is challenging because not only are we not trusting our own intuition, but also too, we are giving ourselves these internal stories that they may or they will or we could
They're
inspire this thing.
they have potential.
And we're also, it's hard to be like, I know we all love to say, like you see it on someone's coffee cup and everyone thinks they're a fucking badass when they're like, it's a fuck yes or a fuck no. Bro, very few
It
people
ain't.
live that way. Yeah, very few people are that ballsy. And here's the truth.
If
I
it's
think those
not a
people,
fuck yes, it's a fuck no. I'm like,
yeah. Yeah, and I'm like, I'm with you. The truth
okay.
is it's so hard for people to live that way. I
Yeah.
just think we have to, and I do think that there's a rightness in that, but I also think like, tell me you've never been in a relationship and someone triggers you and it just reminds you of something in the past and you have a bad moment and you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden you're like, if that person just walks on it or you walk on them, it's not very fair because people just aren't this linear. Like, they're either
No.
perfect, because it's the same way of saying they're either perfect or they're not. And that's so unfair. It's like people aren't. And so, but you got to know in your own life, like, what is the shit and I had to do that work. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here. I had
No,
to
you're
do the
good.
work I had to literally write down, and it took me a long time to figure it out, unfortunately. But it's like I wrote down all things that I'm like, I will never be able to tolerate this. This is not because these are bad traits, because for me, it is insufferable.
Well,
I
and
cannot
also
do
like
it.
writing those things down because if we have amnesia, like that shit, you forget that stuff real fast when somebody comes in
Oh,
with a six pack and like good
and
hair
yeah,
and like, you're like,
yeah.
well, I have no needs. I don't know what you're talking about.
Is it really that important?
I can
No.
gloss it over.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. So,
you sure?
no, I think in the end, yeah, the end, I would just say, if I'm wrapping it up, the one thing I would say is that just for people that are newly either entering the space of divorce, leaving it, or even entering into like the new romantic scene, the rules are still very, very linear and simple, which is your only goal is primarily to try as best you know how to show up as present and as vulnerable as you can. And to remember that it's so important to be true to yourself and care for the people that you have. And the
Yeah.
hard part is sometimes that looks like doing the thing that causes you immense pain. And that's what you sign up for when you become a parent is you commit to suffering any burden that you have to make sure they're well taken care of. And I think in the same way, having that same love for yourself, that even though someone might be really exciting, if you know in your heart of hearts that you really don't get to be in the room, then the tragic part is all the love that would flow to you, it flows to the mask you're wearing. None of it
Yeah.
gets through to you,
It's so true.
So,
So
yeah,
profound. Well, thanks for coming on and hanging out. Maybe we'll do this
yeah,
again
dude.
soon.
Yeah,
We have so many topics we could discuss.
indeed. But it is so
Jay's our
lovely to
new
see you.
co-host. He's our new podcast co-host.
Anytime, just let me know.
All right. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Summer of Me. Thanks for listening to The Summer of Me. You can listen to episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube. Come hang out and follow my chaos on Instagram at Kendra for now. See you next time.